discussing a case where you had 4 or 5 chatzeres lined up, and each of these chatzeres had an opening into the mavli, and they also had an opening from one chatzer to the next. And Rav said that you would not be able to make a shituf mavuyos between these chatzeres if you can get from chatzer 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. The only way you can make a shituf mavuyos is if there's no access whatsoever directly from one chatzer to the next, and the only access to get from chatzer 1 to 2 is to go out into the mavli and then go back into the door that takes you in to chatzer 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That was what Rav said. And the Gemara was struggling to understand why. So at first the Gemara thought that unless you're physically walking into the mavli when you're moving around with the Eruv collecting the bread, unless you're doing that, you're not showing that the mavli is being combined. It might just be an Eruv chatzeres. And that's why you got to walk around. But the Gemara disproved that because Rav himself paskin that if you're sitting at a Suda with a whole bunch of people and Shabbos comes, the bread on the table is good enough to make the Eruv. And clearly no one's going there from place to place. So because of that, the Gemara needed to find another reason why Rav said, that you cannot have access directly from Chatzar to Chatzar. And the Gemara said the reason was, and let's start 4 lines from the bottom on Ein Gimel Nadays. The time of the Rav, the Kosover Ein Mavi Nitter V'lechi V'koyer Ad Sheyehu Batim V'chatzeres Psuchim L'Seichel. The rule is that in order to have a heter mavli, you need to have 2 chatzeres that open up to the mavli, and each chatzer has to have 2 houses in it. What's the reason for this? Now we know that if you have a chatzer that opens up into a rishus harabim, 1 lechi or 1 koyer would not suffice. We don't need to have a lechi that's a pass. It has to be like 4 tefachim, or you need 2 lechis, you need a lechi and a koyer. You need a much greater tikkun to allow you to carry in a chutzner. If the chutzner abuts the Rishus Harabim, then you need to carry in a mavli when the mavli abuts the Rishus Harabim. What's the reason for it? So there are those who say as far as the more people are involved, if there's a rabbim there, the rabbanan would not be matriach the rabbim to do so much in order to be able to carry the mavli. But a chutzner, which is usually dealing with less people, there the rabbanan requires more of a tikkun. So Zokt Rav, when could you rely on the lesser, easier tikkun of only a koyrah or only a lechi? That's if there's a rabbim. What defines a rabbim? 2 chatzeres, and in each chatzer there's at least 2 bab. Now, in our case, if Zokt Rav actually says on Amaral, if you would have direct access from chatzer to chatzer, then what you might do is you might make an error from chatzer to chatzer. If all of these chatzeres are me'urav, if they made an Eruv of chatzeres together, so now, from the perspective of the mavli, it's not 2 chatzeres anymore. It's only 1 chatzer, because all of the chatzeres are now combined, and it's 1 big chatzer. So you don't meet the specifications that a mavli has to have, which are 2 independent chatzeres that open up. Therefore, even if you didn't make Eruv of chatzeres, but the chatzeres are structured with doors in between, so that you have the ability to make an Eruv of chatzeres, even there Rav says no. If the chatzeres could even be combined, even though they're not, you still would not be able to make a shita from Avuyos with the easier remedy of lechi and koyer. You have to go with the remedy required for a chatzer, which is more complex.
Just to clarify, that would mean that you could use a 2 lechis.
Yeah, when we looked earlier, I don't know if it's a regular lechi. The lechi has to be thicker. Like the lechi for a mobi could be much smaller. I think the lechi has to be called a pas. It's called a pas when you're talking about a chutzner, because it has to be like 4 tefachim wide or 1 tefach wide. I don't remember the details, but it has to be much bigger. It's much more significant.
So now, just how does this answer the original question? The original question is why was Igaris psuchos?
Hello.
Hi, David. We can hear you. Can you hear us? We hear David. I don't know if David hears us.
He does. I think he was on the phone.
Oh, okay. Oh, he's on. Okay, I'm sorry about Ryan. What were you saying?
I'm just saying, like, this is like a shvach answer. You know, it could have said like psuchos, it could have said psuchos. All it's really saying is, and therefore it's 1 lechi as opposed to 2 lechis. Rav was trying. What would be so terrible if the Mishnah just stayed as it was, and Taki need to do two lechis?
The Mishnah is talking. The Mishnah is not even talking about it. The Mishnah is just talking about making shitur from avuyos. So the Mishnah is describing what you need. So all Rav is saying is that shitur from avuyos doesn't work when you can join the chetzeres together.
It works. You just have to use two lechis
to discuss how you deal with these chetzeres. The Mishnah is looking to give us an example of shitur from avuyos. Sure, it works if you make the simon for a chotzer, but the Mishnah was on a mission to describe to us the process of shitur, and that wouldn't be the process of shitur.
Okay.
Sure, you have an eitzah of being mesak in the chotzer, but the subject of the Mishnah is not how to be mesak in the chotzer; it's how to be mesak in the movu. So therefore, Rav wants to make sure that the case that the Mishnah uses to describe how you are mesak in a movu actually has the specifications of a movu. So let's see what it says over here. I'm trying to look at where the Mishnah was. Let's see where the Mishnah is. So here's the Mishnah to the bottom of Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. So the purpose of this Mishnah, according to the way Rav learns, is to teach us how you do shitur from vuyos. So if it were telling me a case where you have a bigger lechi, that wouldn't be teaching me about shitur from vuyos. That would be teaching me about the heter chetzeres. But that's not the goal of the Mishnah. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says now. Gufa. Now we're going to drill down directly into Rav's halacha. Amar Rav, let me ask you all a question. If someone made an Eruv and you didn't hold it an Eruv and you don't want people to carry it, do you think you should rip it down to stop them from carrying? So today we're going to learn a little bit about that.
We had that already once.
We had that with Rav Huna, that's correct, and we're going to have it again now. Amar Rav.
Where someone went and said it was no good, and then his students tore it down.
That's right. So Amar Rav, Ein Mavi Niter Belechi V'Koyer. The Mavi cannot rely on the more kulodika tikkun of Lechi and Koyer. Ad Sheyahu Batim V'Chatzeres Ptuchan Osay. Unless there's two Chatzeres and each Chatzer has two Batim inside it, then you can use that Mavi. Shmuel argues and says Afilu Bayis Echad V'Chatzer Achas. Even if you had one house opening up directly to a mavoi and one chotzer that had a bias in it that opened up directly to the mavoi, that would be enough to allow the heter mavoi. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu chorva. Even if on one side of the mavoi there was a chorva, and the chorva still has minimum requirements, the chorva still has walls and some of the roofs. No one lives there, but someone could technically live there. That's good enough to allow to make an Eruv Chetzer. So on one side you had a Chetzer with two bottoms, and on the other side, or a Chetzer with one bias, on the other side you had a Chorva, you're still allowed to make Heter Mavoi with one Lechi or one Koyer. Now, just so people shouldn't think, well, Chorva, no one lives in the Chorva. My mother-in-law told me that when she came back after the war to her hometown, I'm not sure if it was Budapest or if it was in Vienna, I think it was in Budapest, the city was bombed out and her home was bombed. It was rubble. It was a wreck. The roof was collapsed. It was a wreck. But they had nowhere to live, and they didn't have anything to use. So she actually went and found some place where there were some mattresses, and they slept by hand. No cars, no buses, no trucks, no taxis. By hand, she dragged the mattress, about 4 or 5 mattresses for her mother, for her siblings. She dragged the mattresses across the whole city, schlepped them into her broken down house, and they spent it. A couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, because it took time for the government to get things cleaned up. So they actually lived in a real chorva. So chorva is a place where someone could live. And she was from the lucky ones, so she came back. Abai asked his Rebbe Rabbi Yosy. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Afilu b'shvil shel kramim. Would Rabbi Yochanan also allow a heter mavli if instead of one side a chotzer in the house, and the other side a chorva, if you had one side a chotzer in the house, and the other side you had a path that goes into vineyards, or nobody lives. So for that, Rabbi Yosef answered, Amalei loy Amar Rabbi Yochanan el b'churva the chazi ladira. A churva someone can technically live in. Aval shvil shel kramim the chazi ladira, nobody can live there. Loy, that wouldn't qualify. And if you only had a shvil shel kramim on one side and a chatzor with houses on the other side, they would not be able to rely on the heter. Amar Abuna bar Chanina, va'az Rabbi Yochanan tamei, the kula of Rabbi Yochanan that allows you to make a shituf mavuyos with merely a churva on one side, that's Rabbi Yochanan following his shituf. And the question is let's say the churva is considered enough of a makam dira, and therefore, because of it, you could make shituf mavuyos. But at the end of the day, would you be able to carry from your chutzner into that churva? Now, if there's shituf mavuyos, you can carry from your chutzner into the mavi. But could you cross the mavi and then go into the churva? The answer to that is a definite no, because that's going into a different rishus who was not ma'arav with us. He was not ma'arav with us. So the Gemara is going to bring out that that's the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan. Even though he allows you to go into the mavi, even though you're not allowed to cross over into the churva across the street, you might think I should make a gzeira and say we better not let you into the mavi, because if you go into the mavi, you might by mistake go into the churva. Kamash Malon, that Rabbi Yochanan is not worried about that. We'll let you into the mavi, we'll let you carry the mavi, and you'll carry there, and we're not concerned that you'll then go and carry into the churva.
Why is that any different than the typical mavi? The typical mavi has 10 chatzeros opening into it.
But when there's shituf, you're allowed to walk into every other chutzner.
Yeah, they're not friends or anything necessarily every chutzner.
No, but when you make shituf, everybody is joined together. But
they're only joined together if they make the attempt.
If they make shituf, the whole body. Once, in order to be able to carry the mavi, you make shituf, which joins all of the residents of the entire mavi together. But what it doesn't join together are non-residents, like a churva. A churva is a non-resident. A churva does not have to. The owner of the churva does not have to participate in the shituf. He doesn't have to put money in. So he's not part of it. He just doesn't share it. And the chiddush is that his house, even though it doesn't really participate in the shituf, but it's enough that it creates a structure of a mavi that's shitufable. Everybody agrees no one from the churva participated in the shituf. So you're not allowed to go into the churva. All we're saying is in order to have the structure of two chutzeris, the churva will be enough for that, even though the churva is not part of the Eruv. In a regular case of shituf mavuyos, everybody's a resident, everybody participates, and then you're allowed to carry in from your house into anybody else's house in the entire mavi. But the churva that did not participate, just because it qualifies to make the structure into a mavi, but it itself is still not part of that rishus, and you wouldn't be able to carry into there. And Rabbi Yochanan says, even though you can't carry into there, we'll still let you carry into the mavi, and we won't be concerned that you might carry in to the other churva. So where do you see this theme where Rabbi Yochanan allows you into place A, and he's not concerned that you might drift into place B? Ditnan, Rabbi Shimon. I think we learned this sugya before. Echad gagois, ve'echad karfifos, ve'echad chatzeros. I once asked Rav Moshe Haber, you worked hard your whole life. You had a business. How is it that you know Shas cold? So he told me, I have a very, very good memory. I got a bracha from Damer Emes that I would have a photographic memory, and indeed I do. So I said, fine, I understand. But even a photographic memory requires that you should have learned it at least once. But when did you have time to learn? All Shas. So he tells me that's not true. Since I have a photographic memory, every time I learn a Gemara with a Tosfos or a Rashi and it refers to a different Gemara, not only did I remember with clarity the Gemara that I was actually learning, but I also remembered with clarity the Gemara that was being referred to. So by the time I finished 1/3 of Shas, I already knew all of Shas backwards and forwards. This is what Moshe Haber is telling me. He says, Ewe, I said, what about Ewe? Ewe arbeit zayeh shver, fazan toide. So he said, Ewe works, but his meat came naturally. So as we progress in Eruvin, and the Gemara quotes different Mishnahs and different Brises, we already know them because we had already referred to them earlier in the Masechta, and this is no exception. And even the next Mishnah we're going to learn, we already went through in detail in the past. So let's see what this Brise is. Echad gagois, vechad karfifos, vechad chatzeros, rishus achas hein lekelim sheshavsu l'soichan, v'loy lekelim sheshavsu b'soichabayis. This means you have multiple chatzeros, and nobody made an Eruv. No Eruv at all. Not b'nei ubei, not together, nothing. No Eruv. If there is a keli that was in the chutzner before Shabbos arrived, in my chutzner, I'm allowed to pass it on to another chutzner and to another chutzner. It's a lot of move from chutzner to chutzner. If you had joined roofs, if you ever went to Old City, it's like a football field on top because all the houses are joined. If you have joined roofs, you're allowed to take a chayvitz that was sitting on top of the roof of one home on Shabbos and move it to the roof of another home, and so on and so forth. And the same thing with a karfif. If your house opens up to a field that has a gate around it, and you're chafetzim in that field, you're allowed to take it and pass it from backyard to backyard. So, for instance, if you have a beach chair in your backyard and there's no Eruv, you're allowed to pass it over into your neighbor's backyard. So that's the Reb Shimon's chiddush, even without an Eruv. Echad gagos, vechad karfifos, vechad chatzeros, rishus achas hein lekelim sheshavsu l'soichan. That's only if the kelim were there before Shabbos. But v'loy lekelim sheshavsu b'soichabayis. Kelim that were inside your house when Shabbos arrived, you're not allowed to take those kelim out and move them from chutzner to chutzner. And the reason being is you're not allowed to take it out of your house. Since there's no Eruv anywhere, it's also to take anything from your house into the chutzner. So therefore, even if you take it into the chutzner, you're not allowed to move it to the next chutzner. V'amar Rav, and Rav said about this halacha Reb Shimon, but there's a t'nai. Who shall I yirvu? That's only if, let's say we have 3 chatzeros, 1, 2, and 3, and you could pass a beach chair from 1 to 2 to 3. But what if one made an Eruv? All the houses in one made their own independent Eruv. Then Zokt Rav, you wouldn't be able to pass Kalim from Chatzar 1 to Chatzar 2. Why not? Avol Eruv, if Chatzar 1 made an Eruv, which means now everybody's allowed to carry from their homes into Chatzar number 1, because Rinan Dilma also la fuke money debatim l'Chatzar. We're afraid that since you're allowed to take things from your house if you live in Chatzar A to Chatzar A, we're afraid that now there's going to be things cluttering Chatzar A that were actually not in Chatzar A before Shabbos. They only came out to Chatzar A on Shabbos because the residents of Chatzar A, put things into the Chatzar on Shabbos. Those objects are not allowed to be transported to Chatzar B. So therefore, Zok Rav, we're going to make a gzeira. Even though technically you're allowed to pass things from Chatzar A to Chatzar B, but since you're not allowed to pass things from a house in Chatzar A into Chatzar B, we're not even going to allow you to pass anything from Chatzar A to Chatzar B because we're afraid you might pass something from a house in Chatzar A to Chatzar B.
So what does it mean, Eruv?
Sorry?
So who?
Eruv means that the residents of Chatzar A made an Eruv within themselves, which now permits them to take kalim from their homes into their chutzner.
So they didn't make an Eruv with Chatzar B.
No, if they did, for sure you're allowed to carry from A to B.
So was there a door between them?
It doesn't really matter. If
there was no door between them, but if there was no door between them, you're not going from A to B anyways.
If there was not a door between them, then what would the whole shiloh be? You can't pass things either. There's access. There's obviously holes in the wall that you could pass things through, or you could pass things over the wall. Otherwise, it's not a shiloh. If it's impossible to pass anything from Chatzar A to Chatzar B, so then what's Reb Shimon's halacha you're allowed to? It's impossible to do. So obviously, Reb Shimon's talking about a case where even though there's a wall in between the 2 chatzeros, there would be a possibility of passing things from Chatzar A to Chatzar B. That would be either over the fence, or if there were small holes in the fence that don't constitute a chutzner, that don't constitute a doorway, or even if there was a doorway, but they didn't join together. We learned that there's a doorway in between 2 chatzeros. The 2 chatzeros have an option, either to join or not to join.
So there's two tanoim to make this make sense. One, that there was a door between them. 2, that the 2 of them didn't join together. Even though it says Irvu, it's restricted Irvu in Chatzar A, but not Chatzar A and B.
because we'll never do the whole chiddush of Shimon is even though Chatzar A did not make an Eruv Chatzar B, you're still allowed to pass things from Chatzar A to Chatzar B. His whole chiddush is that you're allowed to carry without an Eruv. So of course they didn't make an Eruv together because then you don't need Rav Shimon's Kula. Everybody agrees that if Chatzar A and Chatzar B were made an Eruv together, you can carry from Chatzar A to Chatzar B. And everybody agrees you could only make an Eruv from Chatzar A to Chatzar B if there's a doorway. So here, either there was no doorway, or there was a doorway, but they chose not to make an Eruv. The most important point here is that there is no Eruv between Chatzar A and Chatzar B, and even though there's no Eruv, Reb Shimon still allows you to pass Kalim from Chatzar A to Chatzar B, even though there's no Eruv. However, that's limited. That's only if there's really no Eruv in A and no Eruv in B at all. But if the people of Chatzar A got together and made an internal Eruv in A, that would disallow them not to pass any Kalim from A to B, because we're afraid if we let you pass any Kalim from A to B, you might also pass Kalim that were in houses inside A into B, which is not going to be allowed. so that's the Gzera that Rav makes. But Shmuel says, Ben Yervu, Ben Noyer, but you don't make a Gzera. You let people carry in to the Chatzar from their houses, and you let people carry items from Chatzar A to Chatzar B, but items that originated in a house in Chatzar A, you're not allowed to. And we don't make Gezeris over this. We don't make Gezeris over this. So Zok the Gemara, V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan also said, Halachic Rab Shimon, Bein Yirvu, Bein Lo Yirvu. So you see Rabbi Yochanan doesn't make these types of Gezeris, don't carry to place A, because if you carry to place A, you might also carry to place B. You see, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't make such gezeres. You see that I'm not concerned that I might take an object that was in a home in Chatzar A into Chatzar A and then further transfer it into Chatzar B. We're not worried that will happen. So therefore, Hakanami, in our case with the Churva, the Chatzar l'Churva. We're not worried that just because we allow you to carry your things in the Mavui, that you might actually cross the street and take it into the Churva. We're not worried about that. So you see, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't make such gezeres. So there are two different gezeres, but what they have in common is we're not going to outlaw taking to A because it might lead you to take to B, and B would be also. We allow you what you're allowed, and we don't worry about making gezeres. So that's the Makar that Rabbi Yochanan holds, that if on one side of the Mavui was a Churva, and on the other side there was a Chatzar, you could still rely on the Kula of Shituf Mavuyas. Yosy Rav Bruna, the Ka'amar Lahashmaitza. Rav Bruna was saying over this halacha, which halacha? Rashi says the halacha of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan that you could allow a Eruv, you could allow a Shituf Mavuyas even if there's one house and one Chatzar. Rabbi Elazar heard this. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Bar Rav, my Talmud Chacham, Yeshiva boy. Bar Rav, Omar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel actually say that? Does he actually allow you to make shitufim and vuyos when there's only one house and one chutzner? Amalei. Rabbi said, yeah, that's what I heard. I'm 100% sure. Amar he said, I don't believe you. Achvili Yishbuze. I want to know where Shmuel lives. I want to ask him myself. Achvili says, this is his address. Also, look, I made the Shmuel. So Rabbi Elazar confronted Shmuel face to face. Amar Mar Hachi, did you actually allow shituf when you don't have two chatzeres, two batim? Amalei, Shmuel says, yes, that's exactly what I said. You have a problem? So Zok Rabbi Elazar, I have a big problem. Because Marud Amar, you yourself, Shmuel said, and we had this Gemara as well, Ein lonu be'eruvin el koloshen Mishna seinu. When it comes to Hilchos Eruvin, you need to follow precisely the words of the Mishnah. And what does the Mishnah say? Our Mishnah that we just learned says that the relationship between a mavui to chatzeres is the same relationship as chatzeres lebatim. Just like an erev chatzeres you can't make unless you have two batim in it. A mavui requires two chatzeres. So how could you argue with a comment that you yourself made? That we need to follow the formula as stated precisely in the Mishnah. Ishtik, Shmuel did not have an answer for Rabbi Elazar. So the question is, was he not answering him because I don't owe you any explanation? Or was he not answering him because of Shtika Kaida? Frek the Gemara, Kibla Minei, I like Kibla Minei. Did Shmuel accept what Rebbe Eliezer told him and back down, and now he required 2 chatzeres and 2 batim, or did he maintain his kula? Toshma, I'm going to prove it to you from a story that illustrates what Shmuel's opinion was at the end of his life. The Humavua, Davidar Bey, Avis Bar Ihu. Avis Bar Ihu was a Yid who lived in the Movi. And Ovid Lelachia, and he made a lechi. And Rashi tells us, when we see on the Beis, that there was only one house and one chutzner in the Movi, it was his. And he made a mere lechi, which is the kula dike tikkun of a Movi. V'shar le Shmuel, and Shmuel said, no problem, you can do it. Also, Rav Anon came, and Rashi says only after Shmuel died, because he would have never had the chutzpah to do this during Shmuel's life. Shadya, he tore down the lechi. He tore down the Eruv. He said, it's not a good Eruv, I'm tearing it down. So you see here that you're allowed to tear down the Eruv so that no one should rely on it if you know that it's not a good Eruv. So this gentleman, what was his name again? Avos Bar Ihu was very unhappy with Ravanan, and he told him, Omar, he said, Mavud Dayarnebe, this moment that I live in, Vasina Mishmedim Ar Shmuel, and I made a proper tikkun according to the guidance of Shmuel. Nesi Rav Anon Bar Rav Nishadimam, and you're going to have the chutzpah to come and tear it down? How you talking? But what you see from this story is that Shmuel remained in his psak till his death, and he held that this was a good Eruv, even though there's only one house in this Eruv.
Yosy, the only issue at hand here is whether it would needed the tikkun of a mavui or the tikkun of a chatzeres.
Correct.
Now, if it for sure needed a tikkun, it was just 2 mavis, 1 mavi, that 1 lechi or 2 lechi.
Yeah, because you need a separation between the Rishus HaRabim and the area that you're going to be allowed to carry.
So it would just as easy for him, instead of tearing down 1 lechi, to put up another lechi on the other side.
Kanoim never help. They just tear things down. You're thinking, if you're a kanoi, why would you just tear things down? Why don't you actually help someone comply? You know, you can ask the same thing about inspectors, building inspectors. They'll come in, fail. So you ask them, what's wrong? I'm not telling you, you have to figure it out yourself. Fail. So inspectors aren't there to help you comply. They're there to harass you. And this is what people protest to the government, and they want inspectors not to come and say, fail. The job of the inspector should be to assist the contractors in complying. And a lot of governments have, like I know the provincial government has made a lot of changes in many inspection agencies, especially the Ministry of Labor, is they don't come and give out tickets so fast anymore. First they come and they help you comply. If you're defined, yeah, you'll get fined. But generally, their mandate is not to fine, although it's a fine line because they also have to generate revenue. So anyway, talk to Gemara weiter. Neiser of Anna Barav, Mashad Yamon, you're going to come and ruin an Eruv that Shmuel said was fine. But what you see from here is that Shmuel remained in his shita until the very end. Shmamina l'kibla minay. So you see from here that Shmuel holds that in order to make shitufim avuyos, the heter mavi you only need 1 house and the other one does not be a house. Zok Gemara la'olam emelach kibla minay. Really, Shmuel was makabel and hold you the 2 chatzeres and you need 2 batim in each chatzer. But we're missing the story. I still never explained precisely what this mavi was and what it looked like. I just said that it complied with Shmuel, not with Rav. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of precisely what was there and where the confusion was. And in fact, you don't have a raya what Shmuel said. Because v'hacha chaznahu da v'achol mahama bevese. V'osi b'ayis bevei knishta. So let's stop a second. There was Avos Bar Ihi. He had a house in the chutzner. There were probably 2 houses in that chutzner, and he was on one side of the movie. On the other side of the movie, there was also a chutzner, but it had 1 house and 1 shul. So the question is, the shul is not a house. The shul is not a base dira. And since the shul is not a base dira, it would not qualify as a house, and therefore, if you would be mater to have shitin from vuyos, in fact, it's showing that you don't need to have 2 houses in the chutzner. But this was not typical. The second house, like we said, was a basic knesses. And the chazan of the basic knesses, the custodian, He ate in his own house. But but he slept there. And the question is, does that give the Beis Medrash a status of a base dira? So it will qualify to make the structure of the Mavi correct, or does it not qualify? It all depends on the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, what's called Kviyas Mokum. We had on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. Let's go back to Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. If everybody looks it up, you'll see that Rav holds it's Mokum Pita and Shmuel holds it's Mokum Lina. So this Avis by Rav, Bar'i, when Shmuel allowed him to make Heter Mavi, he misunderstood Shmuel's reasoning. And he thought the Avis Bar'i Savar Mokum Pita Gorim. Avis Bar'i thought that the reason why Shmuel allowed it, it's Mokum Pita Gorim, and he didn't eat there, he ate at home. So really, this Beis Medrash that he merely slept in is not called a base dira. And in spite of that, from Avis's perspective, Shmuel said you can make shita from vuyos, so that's where Avis got it from. It must be that Shmuel allows a heter mavoi even without two houses. But that wasn't really the case. The reason why Shmuel allowed it is because Shmuel tameid amar mokam lina garim. We learned on Ein Gimel Amud Aleph that Shmuel holds what determines if it's a mokam dir or not is if you sleep there. And since the Chazan Knesset slept in that Beis Medrash is like a regular house. So in fact, while Shmuel was alive, the Chazan Knesset was still alive, and he slept in that house. And now I have two chatzeres, and each chatzer had two houses. And that's why Shmuel allowed. Now, after Shmuel died, I guess this caretaker either wasn't there anymore, or he stopped sleeping in shul. So Rabbanan came, and he said, you can't use the Eruv anymore. Avis Bar'i didn't realize that the reason why Shmuel considered the shul a beis dira was because someone slept there. Avis thought that Shmuel did not consider the Beis Medrash a beis dira. And he thought that Shmuel was being matter because you don't need two batim and two chatzeres. So you don't have a raya from here, what Shmuel held, because Shmuel could have easily been matter this because he holds Makam Lina Garim. And Avis might have just not understood. So retroactively, Rav Anan wasn't protesting Shmuel's psak and tearing down the Eruv. Rav Anan was saying Shmuel's psak no longer applies because Shmuel only allowed you to use a heter mavi because there was someone sleeping in the shul at the time. But now there is no longer anyone sleeping in the shul anymore. So that's why Rav Anan tore the Eruv down, because in fact it's not a good Eruv even according to Shmuel. Okay, Gavaltik. So Rav Anan was not a kanoi, he was very pragmatic. Zogt Eile Gemor Weiter. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Mavi. Shetzidoi echad oivet gechavim. So you have a mavi. On one side of the mavi is an oivet gechavim agoy. V'tzidoi echad Yisrael. On the other side is a Yisrael. So if there was just two houses in the mavi, one side is a Yid, one side is a Goy, we all know the halacha. You do not need any heter at all. You don't need anything at all. That Yid is sharing the mavi with one Goy. He can just walk out without an Eruv. He doesn't have to rent their space. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov in the Mishna, because Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov in the Mishna said, only if there's two Yidin living in the chutzner with the Goy do they need an Eruv. One Yid alone, they don't. Why not? Because the whole problem with a Goy is because Chazal don't want you living with a Goy, you'll be influenced. Two Yidin will live with a Goy in the chutzner because they're not afraid of getting killed. It's 2 against 1. But one Yid by himself would never live with a Goy in the chutzner. So therefore, he's going to move out anyway. So therefore, we don't make him we don't make him rent the space from the Goy, because this is not a situation that's going to remain very long. So here you have a case with one Goy and one Yid share Mavi. So really, you shouldn't need any Eruv. But connected to the Yid's house, not connected to the Mavi, just connected only to the Yid's house, were other Yidin. So this picture is good, but the ArtScrolls picture is even nicer. So here you have a case. You have your Mavi in the middle, and then one side you have the Goy, and then this side you have the Yid. So really this Mavi is being shared only by the Goy and the Yid. But there's two other Yidin whose houses connect to the main Yid's house. And the question is, these people, they can't carry anything out into the Rosh Hashanah, because no one's allowed to carry, no Eruv in the world would help to carry something from your Rosh Hashanah house into Rosh Hashanah. So they wanted the benefit being able to store some of their stuff in the Mavi. So they thought, let's make an Eruv Chatzeres with the Jew. So now we can carry into the Yid's house, and from the Yid's house we can now carry into the Mavi because now we're one party. So that's what they wanted to do. Let's make an Eruv together, so at least we can access the Mavi and put our stuff there. So that was the case. What was the psak halacha? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Mavi shetzida echad oivet gechavim You're not allowed to join the three Jewish houses, so that the other Yidden could go through the door of the Jew's house through the door of the Chutzner into the Mavi. You don't allow that to happen. Why? So that's a mystery. We're not going to find out until Amud Aleph, but I'm going to tell you why, because it's not Geschmack not to understand. And the Gemara is going to tell us later on that the main reason was not because there's a problem with the structure of the Mavi. The problem is that we don't want Jews living with Goyim. If the other two Yidden can now come through my house and share in the Mavi, I won't be afraid to stay in the Mavi with that Goy, because I have two Yidden who are there with me. But if we disallow it, then it's only me and the Goy sharing the Mavi. That's a situation where I'm going to be afraid to sustain, and then I'll move out. And that's what the reasoning is, which the Gemara will tell us in Amud Aleph. So Amalei Abai Rabbi Yosef. Abai told Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rav Afilu b'Chutzner. What if it wasn't a Mavi? There was a Goy's house in the Chutzner and a Jew's house in the Chutzner, and in the same structure, there are two houses connected to the Jew's house, but wasn't in the same Chutzner. Would it have the same halacha? Amalei in. If he didn't say it, like, what should be the difference? The same reasoning that would disallow you to do this in a Mavi would also disallow you to do this in a Chutzner. So after Gemara, no. Once I explained already, I already let the cat out of the bag, and I told you the reason is you don't want to eat to live with the Goy. So then we understand it's the same svara. There's no reason to make a distinction between if this occurred in a Mavi or if this occurred in a Chutzner. But if it wasn't for my information, Havamina, I would have thought that time of the Rav, the reason why Rav does not allow you to make this Eruv has nothing to do with stopping someone from being close to a Goy. It's that the Sover ain't Mavi Nitter Belechi B'Kaya Achi you bottom B'Chatzeres Psuchim L'Soichai. It's because in this case we didn't have two Chatzeres that each had two bottom in it, and maybe that's the problem. But if that's the reason for it, then V'Tarta Lomeli, why would Rav have had? Why did Rav say the general rule that ain't Mavi Nitter Belechi B'Kaya Achi bottom B'Chatzeres Psuchim L'Soichai, and he also had to issue a specific psak about this case where you don't let them make the Shita from Avuyos when there's three Eden on one side. Why do you have to say it? If the reason is because it doesn't fit the structure of Mavi as prescribed, so there's no need to get into the details of any case. We know the structure, it either meets it or it doesn't. So tomorrow, no, you would still need it. Tzricha. Because the Imeahi, if you only had the general rule that you need two bottom and two chatzeres, Havamina diras oivet kachav mishma dira. I would have thought that the house of a Goy will also add to the total of houses that have to be there. Kamash Malon the dearest over the Chav Malosh Madir. Maybe Rav wanted to make it very clear that the reason why you can't make Shita for the Goy is because a Goy doesn't count to create the structure of Mavi. The Imehacha, and if Rav only told us this halacha with the Goy, we wouldn't have known whatever we need to know, because Havamina lo yadana bottom kama. He didn't specify exactly how many bottom you need. We know you need two chatzeres. That's the case here, but we don't know specifically how many bottom have to be in each chutzner. Kamash malon bottom train. So that's why Rav had to tell us specifically both halachas to tell us that the structure of Mavi requires two chatzeres with two bottom, and a goy doesn't work. But hashta. But that all makes sense if Rav only expressed his opinion related to a Mavi, because all of these rules are Mavi related. But Hashad Amar Rav Afilu Chotzer, but now that Rav said that this restriction applies to a Chotzer as well, so the reason for this halacha can't be because of how a Mavi needs to be structured, because the same halacha applies to a Chotzer as well. So now we know the real reason of Rav. Time of the Rav, the Kasavar Aser Lasas Yochid, the Makim Ovid Kachavim. You're not allowed to create a scenario where a Yid will feel comfortable living with a Goy. And by allowing this Yid to join forces and make an Eruv with the other two Yidden, which will now have the other Yidden come into the Chutzner, that's too dangerous. That's too dangerous. And therefore we don't allow him just to prevent him from living with a Goy. So this is not even on the Hilchos Eruvin the Kashayla. We're just using Hilchos Eruvin to prevent Yidden from living with Goy. Amar Rabbi Yosef, that's wonderful, because now I finally understand the mystery that I've struggled with for a long time. Now I know what I meant. I heard Rav Tavla say something. I didn't hear clearly what he said, but I heard him make two statements, and in each statement he said goy, oivet kachav, and I wasn't sure what he was saying. I heard Omar oivet kachav, oivet kachav trei zimni, v'lo yadana my Omar, and I didn't know what he was saying, but now it all makes sense. He was saying halacha is you can't make this erev if you're in a chotzer with a goy, and you can't make this erev if you're in a mali with a goy. And now it all makes sense to me what I heard from Rav Tavla. That's the end of this sugya. The next Mishnah we learned in detail many times. It's up to the Olim if they want to continue on with the Mishnah. It's only 10 to 10, or if the Olim would rather stop.
I'm okay for 10 more minutes.
I'd rather stop.
Okay.
Okay, so then we'll leave it.
I've got a lot to do.
No problem. We'll leave it tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Didn't we learn yesterday